Good afternoon. I would like to thank everyone for coming today to our panel about how to build a better engine on partnerships and companies and organizations working towards a more equitable outdoor space. So thank you for being with us this afternoon. I hope that you've had a chance to check out some of the other panels and some of the other speakers and everything they've had today to say today, and that you will stick with us for the next 2 days. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and I'll stick around and introduce myself, and then we'll get right to it today. So I have Nathan Anker, and Nate is with the nonprofit PAIR, and he came to that organization in March of 2012. He graduated from Whitworth University in 1997 with a BS in biology. Prior to PAIR, Nate owned Inside Passage Expeditions, a sea kayaking company operating in British Columbia, managed at the Seattle REI store, and led numerous wilderness trips with Catherine Freer, a wilderness therapy expedition company. Nate's passion for mentoring youth, providing positive experiences, and creating a space for positive change and growth has been the driving force for Nathan's motivation. In 2016, he started PAIR's Bike Mechanics School, a PAIR Works program. Nate's other passions include mountain biking, racing, cyclocross, climbing, kayaking, backpacking, backcountry skiing, and chasing his 2 kids around, Huck and Aurora. So thank you for joining us, Nathan.
Thank you.
And then next we have Janice Tennant, and it's Janice. Janice joined Merrill in 2020, bringing more than 18 years of global brand building experience. She most recently served as the Chief Marketing Officer for Cat Footwear, a brand within the Wolverine Worldwide portfolio and global footwear licensee of Caterpillar Inc. Janice helped lead the brand through a successful repositioning. These efforts contributed to an all-time record revenue in 2019 through coordinated global product launches, elevated integrated marketing campaigns, and a strong pivot to digital direct offense. Prior to Cat Footwear, Janice was the director of marketing at Kimberly-Clark and PepsiCo, gaining extensive experience across brand management, digital marketing, new product development, customer marketing, and multicultural marketing. Janice holds an MBA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is a graduate of Queen's University in Canada with a degree in physical and health education, where she developed her passion for encouraging people of all abilities to participate in physical activity to help them live their best lives. Her passion for the outdoors started on her first camping trip with York Youth Connection Camp in Toronto, and continues today as she and her husband pass this tradition to their 2 sons. So thank you for joining us today, Janice, with Merrill. And then next we have, but not last, we have Lloyd Vogel, and he's with Garage Grown Gear, and entering the outdoor industry through a background in guiding and outdoor education. Lloyd Vogel is the CEO and co-founder of Minneapolis-based Garage Grown Gear, an avid ultralight backpacker, trail runner, and mountain unicyclist. There's one you don't see every day. Lloyd's love of the outdoors was born on the rivers and lakes of northern Wisconsin. Lloyd and his team at Garage Grown Gear have built a curated web store dedicated to highlighting small, startup, and cottage outdoor companies, focusing specifically on gear used for ultralight backpacking and long distance hiking. So, and again, I'm your host. My name is Latreia Graham. I am a journalist and contributing editor for Outdoor Retailers The Weekly, and I'll be moderating this panel. So welcome to everyone listening, and then welcome to our panelists. Thank you again for joining us today. So I'm going to go ahead and start jumping right into this. How we're going to do this is we're going to have a couple of questions people will answer. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and I will leave time for questions at the end, and we'll do our best to address as much of these as we can. So something that I've been thinking about, when I entered this industry, there was such a strong emphasis on the word community. It seems to be something that this industry prides itself on, but we don't necessarily talk about how brands and organizations and companies define it. So how does your organization define the term community?
So I can take a start at that. So if you think about community as a term, that's really about people who share a common interest, have things in common. I think from a Merrill perspective, we really believe in the power of the community that's surrounding the outdoors. So if you think about it, there are people who understand the value of the outdoors in the sense of it's a place where they get growth by trying new skills, new challenges. It's a place where they're rejuvenated. It's a place where they're inspired. And so from a Merrill perspective, you know, it's that important that we put it into our purpose in the sense of how do we really share the simple pleasure of the outdoors with other people who see that and bring new people into that. And so that doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, what you're, where you live. We think it's something that is universal and something that we want to build a sense of community about to help get more people involved in that area.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we kind of look at community kind of on a couple different tiers. Primarily, we exist to be able to support other small businesses. So when we think of community, we think of partially our community as our community of brands that we work with. And so we think of the brands that we work with as a part of our community. We think of our customers, the people interested in ultralight backpacking, the broader outdoor community as well as being an aspect of who our people are. And then we think about kind of what our own community is in terms of our staff and our company culture. And I think that there's definitely parallels in terms of all of those of trying to make for an inclusive listing of brands. That's something that we've kind of focused on a lot in terms of giving small brands a voice, giving companies that don't necessarily have access to a lot of marketing power, that don't necessarily have access to more traditional means of conveying their voice through sometimes crowded outdoor space. And I think that parallels with our audience and our community as well, in terms of that it's very important for us to find ways to give voices to and share stories from those that don't necessarily always have a platform to be able to do that. Yeah, so I think trying to make our communities on those three kind of tiers as inclusive as possible and encompassing.
I think from our perspective, we really look to how we engage with folks. Is there a relationship that we have with an organization, with a partnership that we have? To give some context, we're a nonprofit organization here in Portland that works with homeless youth. And we really try to bridge that gap of being in relationship with somebody. That is what is the formative piece of our community. And is there a sense of belonging? I think that's a really huge piece that doesn't just exist with the folks that we work with, but with everybody in the broader sense of a community. Our donors, the people that we get, grant funding from, et cetera, et cetera. So we really try to live at that personal level as far as who we define our community as.
Yeah. Thank you guys for that. Those were really introspective answers. I know we're living in this crucible moment, right? Where right now we are talking about belonging, we're talking about race, we're talking about class and everything that's happening because of this sort of looming recession, the pandemic, all of the unrest that we're living through, working through and talking about. But I think there is merit to looking at the longer lens approach and understanding how you all in your organizations approach JEDI. So that is justice, equity, diversity initiatives. Before 2020, before this moment, how did you think about them? And then in the second half of the question, we'll talk about how that's changed with everything that's come to light now. But so pre-2020, how did you all approach JEDI work?
I can start off with this one. Casually, I think prior to 2020, we're a pretty small company. Prior to about 6 months ago, there was 2 of us. Now there are 6 or so of us that kind of have various degrees of interaction with Garage Growing Gear. And I think prior to everything happening, we were a group of individuals who all shared similar ideology, but not necessarily a business with cohesive sets of ideals that guided our practice. And I think that has that diversity work is something that we've always talked about in meetings. It's always something that we've always tried to put at the front of our brains, but nothing that was really baked into the structure and the operations of our business. And I think part of that comes from being a small business focused on just keeping the lights on for a little while. And I think part of that comes from needing to have a wake up that it needs to be, that your work needs to be infused with something that's bigger than just the day-to-day operations. And it's certainly the events of the last couple months have pushed that to the forefront, so that it's not just a group of progressively minded people working together, but it's a group of progressively minded people working strategically to use their voice in a strategic and powerful way.
So I can't speak fully to it because I'm only really 45 days on the job, but I can tell you it's actually one of the things that brought me here. So I know in my onboarding, but also through my research and deciding to take this role and position here at Merrill, that the team has been on this journey starting back in around 2018, where it became a part of the strategic imperative for us to really figure out how do we really think about these JEDI initiatives as part of our growth plan going forward. And then in 2019, they signed the CEO pledge early in the year. I think the events of late have really just accelerated, first of all, our efforts in the sense of can we afford to wait is really the question that we've been asking ourselves a lot internally. The second piece of it is that when we looked at sort of the things that we were doing, we're now looking at them with a different lens to say, are we having the impact that we want? Do we have the right plans into place? Are they going to have the right type of change that we want to see in the marketplace, as well as in our teams, as well as with our consumers? And so we're asking different questions in the past like 30 days, 45 days. Do we have a clear plan of what that looks like? We're starting to formulate that right now, but I think the reality is that we realize that there's probably way more that we can do sooner rather than later.
Prepare, we, the demographics really started to shift here in Portland as far as who we were seeing coming in our doors. And so we very purposefully back in 2016, really started our journey. We partnered with an organization called CEI, which is the Center for Equity and Inclusion. And it was really about raising our collective consciousness so that we could build some tools for advancing our efforts and really just kind of understanding the work that was in front of us. We're now seeing, over 50% of the youth that come in our doors is youth of color. And as a predominantly white organization that started 18 years ago in the predominantly white town, we realized that there was a lot of work that needed to be done. There was a lot of stuff that we needed to peel back from ourselves so that we could truly connect with these kids. And so, yeah, it's been an amazing journey. It's been a humbling one to where we've had to develop some common language and a framework just in helping us to kind of understand kind of the deeper disparities that were out there and how we could better address them. And we're still on this journey. It's a never-ending one. It's one where we're going to make mistakes, but also hopefully move through it with some grace and forgiveness with one another, and hopefully better connection with the kids that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. To sort of piggyback on what you just said, Nathan, you talked about sort of clarifying or crystallizing the language. You talked about building a framework. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And you can if you like, peg it to, you know, what's happening in the last 30 days if you want, because Portland, as you know, news-wise, is everywhere right now because of everything that's happening. If y'all don't know what's happening, please Google it and pay attention to it. But yeah, and then Janice, if you had anything you wanted to add to that, and then Lloyd. So we're talking really about the frameworks, the language that y'all are using, and then, you know, the last 30, 60 days of what we've been experiencing.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, even just over the last 4 months, things have been fairly challenging, I imagine, for a lot of folks. And I can kind of come back to this framework and how we're kind of understanding folks, I think, better. You know, but we've had to shut our doors and temporarily. And in the midst of it, you know, ask some really hard questions around how we can support particularly our young folks who not only are living in trauma on a day-to-day basis, but also suffering from so many of the isms that we've been dealing with throughout time. And so a lot of this came back insofar as establishing our own framework around understanding our own white privilege and how we can really strip that away, how we can realign some of the power balance that has for such a long time been a huge inequalizer in our society. And so what are the things that, you know, we're doing to try to change that, I think was really at the front of our work. And so on a day-to-day basis, kind of coming back to what we do as an organization, we meet the needs of these young people. You know, we try to become almost a parental figure, if you will, just in relationship and how we mentor these young folks. Because these guys don't have voices. There is no power out there on the street. And particularly for our young folks in the BIPOC community, we really needed to come up with some tools that we could then pass on to them, that they could use. How do they have a voice? What are we doing to help them give a voice? And so we've really opened ourselves up to figuring out what their wants are, not just what their needs are. And that's how we've been able to try to move forward in where we are today, which is challenging.
Yeah, I would agree with what Nathan is saying. It's this journey, as you said earlier, isn't going to happen overnight. I think the thing that we are aware of is that we are starting it and that we have a long way to go and that we need to be open to the learning, the course correcting, the feedback that we get along the way. There's probably 4 things that we are sort of considering for us as an organization about where do we have the opportunity to drive influence and change. The first is with ourselves, right? And so sort of how do we as a team start to see and understand the needs of diverse populations right now and understand them from a more intimate sort of point of view. So the first thing for us is really sort of undertaking some sort of internal reflection, looking at our numbers, looking at how we as a team sort of see the world and understand the realities. I know I've done a lot of conversations with my own team, just sharing with them some of the experiences I've had as being an outdoor person on the trail and what that's like. And I think sharing those stories helps to inform and educate people about some of the realities that they might not have visibility to. The second thing is, I completely agree with Nathan, is around how do we amplify those voices? How do we share the different stories that are out there that don't always get the coverage? And so how are we making sure through our marketing efforts, our social efforts, that we find a way to amplify those voices so that they can be heard? But the reality is we live in an outdoor space, right? That's the crux of what our brand is and what it stands for. And we know we can't fix everything, but we can make an effort to make sure that outdoor spaces feel more welcoming, and what can we do there? And so we are taking on steps and strides to understand that, to drive change there, but also within the outdoor industry, how can we be, a champion for that change in the outdoor industry, talking about it, putting processes in place, efforts in place to drive that change. So those are really the 4 things that we are in the process of looking at and putting action plans against that. In the short term for us, for the balance of the year, but also longer term on making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to that.
Yeah, for us, being based in Minneapolis, as I mentioned before, we didn't have a particularly coherent strategy towards diversity and inclusion prior to everything happening. And it clearly became aware to all of us that was a real error in our platform for really utilizing our influence on a space to be able to amplify the voices of those whose voices are not being amplified within the industry currently. We've similarly to Nathan, we boarded up the murder of George Floyd happened 5 blocks away from where our office is, and had a very, very tangible impact on our community here. And I think a very abrupt moment where there was no real discussion about if there needs to be statements made or if there needs to be changes. It was a matter of what, when, and how we can start using our platform to really be the best version of itself. And so we've kind of been referring to this internally as, as we've gone and continued on as a business from this, how can we it's not just like returning to business as usual, but it's returning to business with purpose, that there is something that is elevated about what we're doing. And kind of to look at that, we really looked at how we can amplify and infuse both the things that we're already doing with more purpose, and how we can take new steps to with new initiatives to be able to do that. So, for us, that really looked at holistically looking at everything that we put out, from our social media to our newsletter to our blog to the brands that we work with. We work with almost 100 companies, and there's not a single Black founded company. There just isn't. We have no Black founders out of any of our brands. And there was a real interesting conversations on Instagram saying like, well, where are all the Black founded companies? And it immediately just the realization that we work with dozens of brands, and it's when we talk about diversity within our companies, we talk about diversity in terms of where they're located within the country, or if they're a female-founded company. And not that these things aren't important, but that there are voices within this industry and makers and creators within our industry whose voices aren't being heard, whose products aren't being seen, and that those are things that we need to be proactive about amplifying. So that's looking at things like social media for us. Like, we tell a lot of stories of different long distance hikers and thru hikers, and there's a lot of white thru hikers. If you want to tell stories of white thru hikers, you could do that every day for every minute of every year. And you would have a very engaged audience that'd be pretty interested in what you had to say. But there are a lot of thru hikers out there of color whose stories are also that we want to be able to share. And so that's from us making sure that we're emphasizing and showcasing the diversity in the outdoor industry, because there's a lot of interesting stories to be able to be told. That's also, on a content side, making sure that we are being really intentional to find, to have writers and have opinions in our content that is highlighting content creators of color, and not just to write about diversity, but to write gear reviews, to write, their experience 10 tips for how to cut your base weight, that those articles, and it's not just being relegated to, talking about what's happening currently, that it has some a long-term trajectory for it. So that's really been the conversation for us over the last couple weeks and months, is just how we can relook at the systems that we do and amplify them. We just recently did a giveaway with Backpacker Magazine, and it was something that we're going to continue to do moving forward, but we basically just required the brands that were participating to donate money to Outdoor Afro as a part of the giveaway. We're not a pay-to-play platform, so all of the kind of marketing stuff that we do is all just stuff that we provide for our brands, but we wanted to do something more with this particular giveaway. So we run giveaways all the time, but we haven't used them to do anything significant other than collect emails and get new social media followers. And so I think there is a lot of things as companies that we can do that we're already doing, that we can find small ways that can make significant impacts. And I think that, combined with looking at new and different ways, new and different opportunities, really just means that everything that you do has a certain lens that you're looking at it from, just makes what you do more significant than just gear. And that ultimately is important.
Yeah, you started touching on it a little bit, Lloyd, there, to where I was going with the next question, because your companies and organizations and nonprofits are entities, but there is great power in partnerships, right? In, getting with Backpacker, and Pear and Purist. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit at some point about that, Nathan, and that partnership and how that works. So Purist is a water bottle brand. I will let you explain a little bit better how they do it. And Janice, I don't know if there is, an example of a partnership that you have too, but thinking about how, how we can sort of share that load, maybe one set does outreach or marketing or sales, and sort of how that works. But what questions do you ask when forming a partnership with another company or organization? And then how do you have the conversation about moving forward together to reach the end goal? What do those conversations look like?
So
Go ahead.
I can start on that. From a partnership perspective, I think it's really important to be transparent about sort of what you're trying to accomplish on both sides, and really making sure that there's alignment to that, and alignment to what does success look like. So setting up some parameters around sort of, this is what we're hoping to accomplish. And also sharing what your strengths are, what you bring to this relationship, right? And so us, from a Merrill brand, the fact that we have this expertise in the outdoors, the fact that we have, these platforms that we can amplify, is one thing that we would offer up as one of the strengths that we can bring to the table. We're at a place right now from a partnership perspective that we're starting to really look at the partnerships that we have and new partnerships that we might be sort of pursuing that are in line with our purpose. And those partnerships, we're probably going to be asking them, how do they align to some of our strategic goals and some of the things that we want to drive change on, and how can we help them, and vice versa. So those are sort of the preliminary questions that we start to look at when we're thinking about partnerships, because I think that if you don't have those conversations up front, as you get going and as you start to tackle some of these very difficult topics and difficult projects, it can cause some tension. And so being very transparent up front about what those things are, what you're trying to accomplish together, and knowing that you're in this together and it's going to be a journey, but we're aligned to that end goal, is probably a good starting place.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Janice. When we're looking at folks that we want to partner with, we're really looking at who aligns with our values. And I think that that's a starting point for us. We're really committed to partnerships that build organizational capacity and can really move beyond just the transactional piece of things and into more of a true collaboration. And I feel that this has gone really well for us with Purist. And backstory on that, so much of what we do in the outdoor industry, or even just what we do, is built on connections and who we've met, and through some friends that we raced with that went to go to work with Specialized. Purist was their water bottle division, and now sit under specialized umbrella, but what they are producing are kind of high-end, cold and hot, hard, what's the word I'm looking for? Totally went for a blank there. But anyway, they have this proprietary patent that lines the inside of it with 2 microns of glass. And so that's their big thing around everybody else that's putting out these bottles, that it will never absorb flavor, et cetera, et cetera. So we are both working hard on either end to not only promote each other, but really like, what are the things that they can do? How can they utilize their brand? How can they utilize the power of Specialized to then promote the social justice end of things that are happening on our end here in Portland? And those are the kind of questions that we go to the table with, like, what can we do for each other? So not only is Pierce just not another piece of gear on the market, there's a story behind it. There's an impact behind what they're doing. And we really like the idea that we're kind of embracing this kind of experimental partnership, if you will. And we like to do it with, our own generosity, humor, and, hopefully there's some personal growth in there. And it's coming out on their end as well. We've been down to OR a few times and kind of displaying that partnership. We get a percentage of online sales, and it kind of helps us. And ultimately, while there is some monetary transaction, it runs a lot deeper than just that. And I think there's a real opportunity for particularly some of the big players, even some of the small players in the outdoor industry, to really form these deep relationships with your community partners, beyond just what is happening in the outdoor industry, what's happening at the local level. How can you have a lasting effect? There's more to this story than just, the outdoor piece. And I think that that's what we're looking at when we come to the table. So.
Yeah, so our entire business model is kind of based around the idea of intentional partnerships, in the sense that we work with brands that might hesitate to even call themselves brands because they're just a person with a sewing machine in their basement that makes something cool, and then we sell it. And so a lot of these relationships that we have with brands are very directly relationships with individuals. A lot of the companies we work with don't work with other retailers. They sell directly off their website, and then also sell on garage grown gear. So it's been very fascinating over the last couple months to really see how our companies that we've worked with react to everything that's happening. And we've definitely been noticing and watching and taking notes and seeing how different companies and, again, different individuals react. Because there is a public face in terms of how a company responds, and then there's how a company and the leadership team what they actually believe, and those you'd hope are similar, but you don't super know really until you get to know the people who are running a company, the people that own a company. And it's been fascinating for us in terms of working with small makers and shakers, because it can, I think, for small companies in particular, be difficult to know what your role is in terms of all of this. What is your need in this space to make a statement, to make a stand? How do I do that? I've got 1,000 Instagram followers. Why should I post what I think? I make custom backpacks, and I think that those questions are questions that little companies who might not be very well versed in a conversation around diversity and equity in the outdoors might be hesitant to have, because they don't want to mess it up. They don't want to, and that obviously comes from them also needing to do a better job of educating themselves on the conversation. But it just hasn't been on the forefront of everyone's mind, especially I think for smaller companies. And there's a lot of ways where there's just a lot of questions around that. So I think a big role for Garage Door and Gear, and kind of how I see us in being able to play an active role in those partnerships, is being able to create opportunities for brands to be able to participate in the kind of work that they might want to be able to participate in, but just actively do not know how to access it. I know one of the initiatives that we're currently working on is partnering with a soon-to-be founded nonprofit that does sponsorships and scholarships for potential through hikers of color, and that that is a way for us to be able to corral gear from the dozens of brands that we work with, to give them an opportunity to provide their gear to people who need it, and provide opportunities to hike long trails for people who need that gear. And that I very much kind of view that as an interesting space for us. We've kind of always viewed ourselves at kind of the hub of our small little niche of the outdoor industry, but this is a way for us to use our niche and allow other brands access to ideals that they want to be able to support. So we definitely had the opportunity to see a lot of companies respond how I guess I would characteristic as very appropriately. And I definitely witnessed a lot of companies not do that. And it definitely will impact who we partner with in future endeavors, because customers care, we care, everyone should care. The idea that anyone is too far removed to be able to make statements and to just show support is just not something that I particularly agree with.
Got it. Thank you for that. That leads to my next question. You guys are doing this really well. You're making my job very easy today, and I appreciate that. We talk a lot in this industry about barriers getting to the trail, barriers getting outdoors, and I know each of your companies works very differently in addressing those issues. And so if you want to, and I know, Lloyd, you just sort of alluded to it a little bit, how you're addressing it on a regional level. Some of you all are addressing it on a national level, and then others, in like Merrill, perhaps internationally, right? So how are you looking at what we see, again, not just in this moment in 2020, but this major long lens inequality that we're dealing with, and how are you compensating for it? Nathan, I specifically want to hear you talk about some of the outdoor programs you all do, like the bike program that y'all have. I find very compelling, and sort of how that came about. But yeah, so each of you, if you're interested in answering that question, no harm if you don't want to. But yeah, thinking about moving those barriers on regional, national, and international levels.
Sure. I'll start with that one. I think, for our small organization, it would probably be fairly regional. But that being said, so I oversee a number of social purpose enterprises that we have started, which are, companies that exist under PAIR. And we have a barista training program, as well as a bike mechanic school that is all in-house. And we partner with some larger coffee roasters to help with some of that training, as well as professional bike mechanics to run the training inside our space. And from that, any of the homeless youth, if they're in that space, have an opportunity to go through these 10-week training programs. They're paid to learn if they complete the program. And they just got to show up. And they have an opportunity to then get hired at our barista window, or out at the bike shop that I started 3 years ago, kind of as a segue from the bike mechanic school. And so yeah, I think that, for us, it's really about providing opportunity for folks that wouldn't normally have that opportunity. I mean, so much of what we do is trying to create a platform for which we can engage folks to not only be productive, but to enter into, again, a relationship in which we're giving them tools to to hopefully move themselves or transition themselves out of homeless. And of course, it takes so many more things than just giving them a job skill set. There's, you know, a lot of mental health and, you know, drug addiction stuff that we're working with, as well as all the other oppressive factors, you know, that our kids are seeing on a day-to-day basis. So we're really trying to round them, you know, not just with these, you know, hard tools of learning and like mechanics or, you know, making a perfect espresso drink, but really providing the base layer for a long-term stability for these young folks. I think I'm gonna cut it off because I hear some engine across. I'll let somebody else take it from there. It's probably pretty annoying.
What I think for us, like, we find ourselves at an epicenter of being connected to a lot of gear, not necessarily connected to companies that have a lot of money to get involved, but certainly have gear to be able to get involved. And as that is, money and gear are not polar opposites. Oftentimes, an inhibiting factor for people getting outside is just the cost of it. I think it's something that it can be said that getting outside is a very cheap and easy thing, but for kind of the audiences and the type of outdoor activities that a lot of our community engages in, it's very expensive, from the gear to the travel, to the taking time off of work, from putting life on pause to go hike a long trail. There are costs, there are commitments that are to it, and oftentimes those barriers come in the terms of gear. So I think a big part of kind of how we hope to be able to do that is through showing people of color and highlighting their stories through our social media, because I think that's a powerful tool that we have as our audience continues to grow. And then I think, like, this scholarship that I was talking about earlier, just like really being intentional about how gear gets given out, how opportunities get given out, and make sure that those are things that are structured into what we do, that it's not just a one-time, oh, I gave gear out and I feel good about what my company is doing. Let's move on and check that box. But it's something that is that happens this year, that uses the momentum of what's happening now to be able to create systems and structures that are here next year, that are here in 5 years, to create scholarships and opportunities that that are long lasting. And that just gets baked into the ethos of how businesses run, so that the companies that we come to and ask for gear to be able to sponsor hikers, that's just a byline in their budget for the next year. They just know that they're giving out 5/10 the following year because this is something that they've committed to. So I think it's as much of like using what's the momentum and the energy behind the conversation now to put things in that are going to be here for the future.
This conversation about representation is actually really interesting. It's come up several times for both Nathan and Lloyd, and I think it's a really powerful thing to be able to see yourself reflected in the world and the communities that you serve. And so for me, it's like little things, like when I'm watching HBO and I watch Insecure and I see Issa Rae and Molly as friends going out for a Sunday hike. That isn't about climbing the biggest peak. It's about just sort of taking a break in the day and reflecting. That there's power in that. And that's one of the things that I get really excited about with Merrill as I begin this journey with this brand. They've been doing a lot of storytelling, not only on a national level, but sharing those stories globally, right? To give voice to these communities on a bigger platform. That's one way that we're sort of tackling this. The other is that we're starting to realize that the issues and challenges that are sort of the tension and breaking point for, the BIPOC community here in the US looks different than what is the triggers in Canada, which looks different than what is the triggers in, say, the UK or London or other parts of the world. And so what we are trying to do is start to understand that, using the team members that we have in the parts of the globe to understand what they look like. Because whatever they are, we want to figure out how can we help solve those, remove those tensions, help them make those spaces safer and more welcoming. And so this representation piece is one piece of it, but the other is understanding and collecting sort of the facts around what is going on around the world and where there are areas of opportunity for us to help facilitate and drive some of that change from our respective vantage points as a global organization and team.
I know we're at about 15 minutes till, and I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So audience, if you have questions, please send them over. But the last question I have for you is about accountability, intent, and impact, right? Intent and impact are two different things. What you believe you're going into a situation to do and how it is received by those that you engage with. Because I almost said the words trying to help, but maybe those people don't need help in the way that you think they need help, right? But people that you engage with, right? They may not receive it the way that you intended for it to be. And accountability is a major part of this conversation. So what checks and balances do you, your company, or or your nonprofit put in place to make sure that impact and intent are in alignment?
Yeah, I'll start with, I think the first thing that we can do is to just listen, to understand what does help look like. Like, what does help look like? And really making sure that we're being very thoughtful and intentional about that. The second thing is to put real measures and metrics in place. So, for example, at Merrill, we're in the process of building a scorecard to hold us accountable to, are we sort of driving the type of change and impact that we want to see? The third thing I'd say is really something that seems hard, but we have to be able to do, is to say, sorry, we didn't get it right. I think what people want to see is they want to see a positive intent in the right direction. They know that we're not perfect. They understand that the teams, the world is learning through this process. And so being okay with saying, like, we didn't get it right, this is how we're going to look at it differently, this is how we're going to fix it, is probably the third thing that's really critical, because without that learning from that feedback, you can't go out and try and do better. And so as long as you have the spirit of working towards continuous improvement and trying to be better and do better, I think consumers respect that and they understand that. We've seen examples of that across various brands, across various situations. It's when the brands and the companies don't acknowledge that they don't acknowledge when they've gone wrong. So I think that's something, as we think about this and holding ourselves accountable, is that we're acknowledging that we don't have it all right. There's real blind spots that we have, but we're on a journey of doing better.
Yeah, I think that acknowledgement is definitely at the forefront of accountability. Yeah, as G said, of acknowledging the fact that you're not going to get it right at every step. That we as brands, or I'll speak for Garage Gear, like, we haven't gotten it perfectly in the past, and we won't get it perfectly in the future. But I think that a lot of it comes with consistent self-reflection, consistent conversations, and broad conversations, both internally and with one's audience, that involves a large amount of voices with different opinions and perspectives. I think decisions and negative impacts get made when conversations get narrowed. And when voices get excluded, or when decisions are made hastily and not given intention. And I think, if anything, this has showed companies how much intention matters. I guess for us, like, when we look at we have historically have been a very remote company. So we're based in Minneapolis. My business partner and co-founder is based out in Idaho. So a lot of our systems exist via Google Drive or Google Sheets. And so we have this like master document that breaks down like every single role and responsibility in the company. And it's like, we revisit it quarterly, 4 times a year, that has like, our Wednesday newsletters, our Sunday newsletters, social media posts, like literally everything. It's huge. But what we have put next to those are metrics and thoughts and ways to be able to infuse it with a lens of diversity. And so I talked about this earlier, but having certain numbers of social media posts each month that highlight hikers of color, making sure that we have certain amount of gear that is going out to support causes and organizations that we believe in. And that we have opportunities at our quarterly meetings to be able to revisit this, just as we revisit who's responsible for the roles. We also get to just to look at how we're doing in each one of these areas and revisit it. We haven't revisited it yet, as it's still something that was recently put into place, but I totally agree with the thought that it needs to be quantitative. It needs to be something that's as much a part of the conversation as anything else that you're doing, because if it's not, then it'll just get swept under the rug, and it's not a metric that you'll return to. So.
Yeah, I think for us, when we are sitting at the table and trying to figure out how we can responsibly move the needle, we definitely have an equity lens in which we use, and a process for which we use to make our decisions. But whether we're making a big decision or not, we have a set of agreements that we have sitting out on the table for everything that we do. And one of those agreements is centering the impact rather than the intention. So what we start to look at, like, what is going to happen by the decisions that we're making now. And wrapped up into those other things are things around speaking our truth responsibly, willing to do things differently, agreeing to slow down. Because I think one of the things that happens, particularly in this day and age, is that everything is so quick to move. And we often are like, have a deadline to meet, or, the next Zoom call now to get onto, or whatever that might be. And we're so wrapped up in the fast paced, lane of life anymore. So, trying to really pull that back, try to really slow down. And another big piece is, listening to understand. What are we trying to tell each other? Really? What is that bottom line? And so, I think, within all of that, there's just some difficulty. We expect and accept that there's going to be some non-closure to some of these conversations. And that's challenging, right? Sitting in our own discomfort is a hard thing, but I think it's a necessary thing in order for us to gain perspective and make better decisions.
So I know we've got about, we've got some questions, apologies, that just popped up. So this question is for Janice. Is your company seeing changes with more diversity in the advertising industry? This person is a publisher of the Climbing Zine, and though they have a diverse group of contributors, the ads are almost entirely of white people.
Yeah, it's something that, it's a very good question. And it's one of the things in my, first 45 days in onboarding is we're reviewing the creative. We're looking at the creative and looking at representation in the creative, not only in just sort of like how are we representing consumers as relates to maybe some stories related to Jedi, but also holistically, how are we really reflecting people of different body types, different abilities, all of that. And so I'd say that there's a lot of work for us to continue to do, right? Like in this space. And so it's something that I'd love to bring to the table based on my prior experience working in this space, both at PepsiCo and Kimberly-Clark with multicultural marketing. I recognize the importance of it. I actually think it's a business imperative for our teams. And so really looking at how do we get even better at that and making sure that we are reflecting diversity in all shapes and sizes and colors and so forth.
Thank you for that. I forgot to, I'll rewind in my own brain for just a second. When we were talking, Lloyd, you were talking about there not being any Black founders of brands, right? So from what I found, and this is as the editor of Outdoor Retailer and searching for them ever since I came to this, I was like, where are the Black people? Please point me to them. There are two outdoor retailers run by Black people, Slim Pickens Outfitters in Texas, and Intrinsic Provisions in Massachusetts, and two companies with innovators of color, one being Ceres and the other one being White Paw Run Mitts. That's it. Just to give people on this call, there are still 163 people in this room. That's all we got. Like that's all I found. I'll put it that way. But this question comes from one of those Black retailers, and he says, with there being only two Black-owned outdoor shops in the nation, how would you partner with these shops in hopes of growing the Black community or showing the outdoor community that you're committed to building and developing opportunities for ownership and executive roles on the company side of the outdoor industry? So that's probably more for Lloyd and Janice for this one.
Well, for us, it's interesting because we don't do too much partnership with other retailers, but I mean, certainly, like, we, through our social media newsletter audience and the content that we create, I mean, those are stories that we are definitely interested in telling. And would certainly be interested in exploring kind of what a relationship looks like with another retailer, because we're pretty much entirely online, and our relationship with different brick and mortar stores is pretty much zero at this point. A lot of brick and mortars just don't like to work with online retailers, as there's some friction there. But yeah, I mean, certainly open to collaborations. I also recently did just have some conversations with individual in Brooklyn who is starting up a custom backpacking company, which we're excited to start working with. A guy named Livio, who's really great and is in developing a brand. So there will be a person of color maker and shaker on Garage Grown Gear soon. He's makes some really cool stuff. So.
And I think this is a great question. I'll tell you, I really don't know. Like, I'm new in the role, but I'm interested in learning more about what opportunities we think might be out there for us to partner differently. I think part of it is us also understanding what some of the barriers are that you're seeing. You are firsthand on the, learning, understanding, seeing consumers who are of different color coming into your stores. And I'd love to hear more about just sort of what you think the barriers are. It's one of the big things that I'm digging into. I'm really big on understanding sort of consumers, the motivations, their drivers, and I'm interested in understanding sort of what you're seeing and learning. And then how do we partner in a different way? I think there's one way that I could see is, like, for some of the stories that we have and some of the product that we've developed in partnership with the BIPOC community, is maybe using your store as a place or a foundation for us to sort of launch that story, tell that story. But all ideas are fair game at this point in time. I think it's one of those things that we're at a place of, like, let's try and do some new things differently versus what we've done in the past.
Thank you for that. I'm going to try to answer one or two more questions. I know some people are going to have to go because we're right at the 5 o'clock hour on this coast, but basically have hit the hour. But I think this next question is important, and so I'm going to ask it, and then we'll reevaluate after that. Lloyd and Nathan, are you actively or plan to prioritize seeking qualified candidates of color for open positions in your companies? Is there space for accepting that Black folks like myself are culturally different, have different communication styles, and are willing to change your culture or how you run your businesses in order to truly include us authentically? We, as Black people, have had to assimilate to fit in, don't want to be customers, but want a voice, a seat at the table, and business opportunities. So I don't know which one of you wants to take that.
I'll start. Yes, please. We are not an all-white organization any longer. PAIR was started by 3 women back in 2002. And it has been a priority. We're a really small organization. There are 11 people that work at Pair. And so we wear a whole bunch of different hats. And we, in the last two positions that have become available, last three, I should say, we have done a national search, as much as that's possible for us insofar as having to spend money to search engines. And, you know, I mean, we've tried to exhaust circles of circles. And I will say that our organization is a fairly unique organization in what we do. We are not a typical social worker organization. And we've had some luck in that. But we also, gosh, I mean, we would love more people of color in our organization. Absolutely. And so, you know, when that happens again, if you all have recommendations that you would like to pass on around places that we could post, I'm all ears, absolutely. And I'm happy to put up my stuff here as well if you want to send that to me personally. Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. Would love to hire people of color. Hiring in general is something that's pretty new to us. We are a small team with only a couple of us doing full-time work, and a lot of part-time individuals, and a lot of you know, collaborators, contracted workers. And while we are not an all-white organization, we are a predominantly white organization. We're actively looking for contributors and writers of color. Yeah, I would certainly be very enthusiastic about hiring people of color for the roles that are at Garage Grown Gear. As we haven't hired much in general, it's something that we're hoping to do more. So hoping to be able to diversify our staff.
Because it's 2 minutes after the hour, I'm going to give you all a moment for final thoughts. Is there something that you want people to know or take with them when they log out of this conversation that we haven't had the chance to talk about yet?
I think we've covered a lot of things. We've really covered a broad range of things, but I would just leave this. One is continue to listen and continue to seek understanding, but two, don't be afraid of taking that first small step. I know that in conversations, people are feeling nervous and cautious about like taking a wrong step, but I think we're at a point where we need to start to do, even if it is small, because that first step will lead to greater understanding, greater learning that will then drive to the next step. And over time, we will get to where we need to be. And so I just want to encourage all organizations, all people individually, to just sort of really take a moment of reflection, listen and understand, but say like, what's the one small thing that I can do today, tomorrow to drive that first step forward?
Write your thoughts down and figure out how to make them actionable, and listen and have conversations along the way. And as you're doing that, try to hold those around you accountable. If that's your coworkers, if that's brands that you work with, if that's yourself, sometimes you yourself are the person that you need to check most to make sure that your thought is actually aligning with where it should be. So yeah, carry lots of Post-its and write lots of stuff down.
Yeah, I would echo both of those things. I think that, you know, my call would be to all the white people out there and saying it's time to pick up the burden, time to shoulder the weight, and yeah, because if we don't, you know, everybody else has been carrying it for too long, and it's the only way I think we're going to build bridges and move through a lot of the turmoil that we're in right now. And that might not be the most popular thing to say in closing, but I really believe it. And I think that's how we're going to see change happen. it's time to shift the power.
And on that note, I'm going to end our conversation today. I want to thank Nathan, Janice, and Lloyd for joining us and for having this conversation. Thank you to the participants that stayed and engaged and asked questions. Editor at Outdoor Retailer Mag, if you have questions or need the contact info for any of these people, and I'll get it to you. And again, I'm Latreia Graham. I was your host today. I'm a contributing editor for Outdoor Retailer, and I hope you all will stick with us through some of the conversations that we're going to have over the next couple of days. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Latreia.